Now I'd like to open the, create the opportunity for some discussion. I'd like to invite Lida, Dennis, and Andrew to all come online at this point and to comment on each other's presentations and how they might be brought together. Then for those who wish, there's an opportunity using the chat room to raise extra questions which can be put to each of the speakers. First of all, I'd like to invite Dennis, Lida, and Andrew to comment on each other's presentations.
May I just say that it was fascinating to hear, across our very different papers, the emphasis on giving help. I don't think that when we normally speak of economic models, that is at the center. And again, each of our models is distinct. What we were talking about was not the same thing, and yet giving help is fundamental to all of them. The other is the democratic aspect of it, the proximity to decision makers. I think of the papers, mine is the most political, more blatantly political and very active right now, very intense and quite risky for people in Hong Kong. And yet that idea about our responsibility to recognize people's freedom to achieve a certain possibility, it isn't limited to the poor. It isn't limited to a mainstream idea. There's also this vulnerable political group that is in the mix. So those were things that I heard across the papers that were very encouraging and interesting.
Andrew, would you like to link a comment or two? Just to unmute your sound. Just down on the left. If you could unmute, Andrew, on the left.
Do you want me to go ahead with a comment?
Yes, perhaps Andrew will come back to you. Dennis, if you go ahead, please.
Yeah, up till a few years ago, I had been a resident of Hong Kong, and I spent about 5 years in total in Hong Kong, and before Betty and I came back to the Philippines for good, in 2015 or so. But at any rate, so this movement that you're talking about here, Lida is new to me and very, very interesting. And I am amazed with what you had to say about it. I assume that this movement is something that is primarily, the core of this is among evangelical Protestant Christians. No? Well, then I'd like to know who the folks are, who are involved in this. I wonder, one of the things that I found so very frustrating when I was in Hong Kong was the fact that in those years, the Christians hardly ever talked to each other. So the Catholics didn't talk to the Protestants had discriminatory relationships among themselves, et cetera, et cetera. And so something like this, if it is more broadly ecumenical, is really good news. The question I have for you, Lida, besides if you want to comment on those reactions, would be, how has the government responded to the yellow circle economy? You characterized it as something that's potentially, a political alternative to the PRC-dominated government in Hong Kong. But how has the government, since it's cracked down on the protest movement, has it also followed through and is now cracking down on the yellow circle economy?
Okay, so a couple of things. I do think that the experience of Christianity has changed considerably. I've been researching and spending extended periods of time in Hong Kong since 1997. And I think that one of the most significant changes, in fact, has been the degree to which Falun Gong has been accommodated within the framework of civil society. That is a huge indication of change, a widening of the circle of who has a right to speak and also who has something to contribute to pro-democracy ideas. The response of the government, from what I've been reading recently, has been very juvenile in many respects, targeting the symbols of the yellow circle economy, censoring the icon. I showed you on my very first slide a couple of little piglets, and even these piglets now are a target of the Hong Kong government. They do not want to have this piglet shown, saying that it is something that makes some people uncomfortable, so it shouldn't be shown in public. Guangxi, the bright era mark that's on one of the online retailers. Guangxi is now also being targeted as an unacceptable phrase in Hong Kong. The Post-it notes and other places for people to write their slogans of encouragement now are blank. And even if you have a blank piece of paper, that can be seen as provocative. So it's become really quite silly in order to make people, sort of throw them off their balance, make people feel very nervous about any sign of dissent or any sign of Hong Kong pride. So it's been really quite intense, quite intense.
But are they actually, repressing? Is there a suppression of the businesses? Are they attempting to shut them down beyond giving them a warning for carrying these signs? Have they actually tried to close down businesses that are involved in the Yellow Circle movement?
That hasn't yet happened in that way. No, not yet. It's much more attacking individuals rather than harming the economy. So if someone has in their store any kind of signs, a goddess of democracy statue or something like that, they can be fined and there will be pressure and there will be further pressure. It hasn't yet come to the point where businesses are being shut down.
I want to come back to cooperatives and credit unions, which has been existing for more than at least 150 years, much longer than microfinance and other financial institutions. Although cooperatives and credit unions are not church related, it's people related, but they fit in my view, to the Catholic social teaching of human dignity, being members are self-reliance and self-sufficient, and as well as common good. Common good in cooperative, as I said, one for all and each for one. When it comes to solidarity, credit unions are worldwide, have an organized world credit union movement and cooperative movement under the International Cooperative Alliance and the World Council of Credit Unions. They all work together for progress. And subsidiarity is that people can do things for themselves. And the government should be able, should provide good legislation and good policy for credit union and cooperatives to grow and to expand. This is these are my points.
Perhaps I could come in with a small question at this point. One of the things that Andrew referred to, which is very helpful to me, was the question of governance. That the governance, both external, internal, and individual. I'd never heard it put like that before, Andrew, but I found that very helpful. So I'd like Lida and Dennis to offer their contributions, if they wish, on what governance might mean in a new economic paradigm.
Actually, I was thinking about agency. When each one of us presented our work, I was thinking about how different our discussion is of where the action comes from. And so governance typically is very much above, coming down and organizing for those below. And yet, as Andrew has just mentioned, the idea of the cooperative has been a very grassroots initiative. I mean, here in the United States, Chinese established rotating circuits, rotating systems of credit when banks wouldn't lend to them. That was one of the reasons why people developed credit unions and cooperatives, was because they were excluded from participating in the mainstream structures. So I think of Andrew's comments and how they stimulate me to think about the degree to which right now in Hong Kong, the initiative, the agency of people is so dispersed. They're developing solutions every day in response to new pressures and new needs. So it's a very intense, again, vibrant time because of the fact that so many people are being excluded from the mainstream and do not want to be part of the mainstream anymore. So yeah, I don't think of governance so much as agency and what compels people to act, to create these structures.
In my view, I think that, both what Lida gave us as well as what Andrew is saying, Andrew obviously, but Lida's description of this yellow circle economy certainly is consistent with the principle of subsidiarity as well. And it seems to me that we can draw other lines to other presentations on this business of governance. The core issue here, at all levels, but particularly at the individual level, that is the individual leadership, that is people who would come forward to help create the organization, design it, and make it run, that there are a set of virtues that such people must have internalized and live by if this is to work. So that governance is, first of all, an issue of self-governance or self-rule, which takes us back to one of the things, Bernard Lee was talking about this yesterday, as well as in the small section, I think it was truncated, from Ip Po Kung in Hong Kong. And that is what's at stake in the model of the Confucian entrepreneur, is ultimately a Confucian ethic, that is an ethic of virtue, which focuses on the resourcing of self-discipline to be able to take responsibility. Now, if we emphasize that in our quote unquote new paradigm, that the priority of self-governance, of creating the conditions where virtues can flourish among the leadership group, this will make it very different from conventional lists of demands made upon governments or other higher ups, so that the real change occurs from the bottom up. And this is certainly consistent with what Pope Francis has been talking about in his encyclicals.
I agree. And in the new paradigm, we still need self-reliance, changing of mindset, which for the last 1.5 days, the speakers has been repeating all the time, changing of mindset. Make your mindset more fluid instead of frozen. Fluid to change, to being able to evolve and change. And also participation, people's fullest participation. Even in democracy, we said, we emphasize participatory democracy. Without participation, there's no democracy. This is what I believe. Participation in the economic and social development of all people. Finally, I want to touch on, we also need spiritual power for the new economic and social development. Spiritual power of the people. Values, core values, not necessarily Christian values, ethics, and spiritual power to make this economic work. Thank you.
Those who are attending the symposium but not presenting are able to make little comments through the chat room. Jimmy Sham has just made a comment with thanks to Mr. So, and he has contrasted, I'm not quite sure that I've grasped this, he's contrasted asset-based church development, ABCD, with cooperative. I'm wondering if that leads us, anyway, gives us an insight into the possibilities for an alternative paradigm for the economics of our churches too.
Well, all these acronyms really kills me. To me, ABCD means access-based community development. In the older time, when we talk about community development, we go to a village and ask, what do you need? But now with the ABCD, access-based community development, it is, what assets do you have? The people themselves have lots of assets. Human assets is being number one asset that people possessed. It's the first time I heard about assets-based church development that I don't have any comments on that, because being a Catholic, I don't have too much relationship with the church except to go to Mass every now and then.
But asking the question, what assets do you have, is perhaps a good one. Lida or Dennis, would you like to comment on that?
On the asset-based concept, I think that shifting the conversation to what assets do you have, rather than what do you think we can give you or that you need. I think that this is really, there's a kind of psychological revolution implicit just in that change of question. Because if you ask a person, first of all, the tendency of most people would be, you ask me what assets I have, and I'm going to clam up and not tell you anything because I'm afraid you're here to take them away from me. And certainly that was a big part of the history, in South China for many centuries, so we don't talk about our assets. But here, if you can open that up as a question of what is it that we have, I mean, part of the real struggle with that's going to be is that we're talking about social capital primarily, not necessarily about bank accounts. And then the question is, how do you make that fungible? How do you move from social capital to something that actually can have an economically transformative impact? Now, again, one of the things about micro banking, you know, Eunice's model of this is, you know, that the people, the networks, social networks, you know, are the asset, and that those things make it more likely, if they are properly organized, to help people become accountable, so that sharing or loan making and paying off debts is actually much less risky, is more likely to occur, precisely because the social capital has been engaged. It has become fungible.
Thank you, Lee.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit differently. Rather than assets, I was reminded of, in political science, there's the concept of resource mobilization. And that suggests rational kind of calculation, mobilization, organization, implementation, and through that, then you make things happen, whatever your interest, whatever your cause. That's not my particular vantage. I'm very curious about how consistently across different aspects of life, religion, politics, economy, in Hong Kong, there are certain consistencies. There have been these consistencies, building, and then slowly moving together as the need has arisen for people to tap into the culture of that particular Chinese society. And again, not to be a downer in this conversation, but you know, there is a significant precipice ahead where Hong Kong people have been moving with this energy, and the future isn't encouraging them to continue that way. Their impetus, their impulse, their now natural tendency to move and to act and to create, as Andrew So has said, this kind of fluid nature has been really encouraged in the past year among so many segments of society, that the wall that has only now come down on July 1st is going to be almost unbearable for people. How can they continue to be as fluid and true to themselves now that the whole game has changed?
Only yesterday there was an article in the international news about Beijing's plans to essentially make Shenzhen the center of international finance. In other words, to take over most of the functions that have resided in Hong Kong and been part of its, besides its educational institutions, its residual strength internationally, that would be transferred to Shenzhen. And so the idea that Hong Kong's future can rely upon the wisdom and largesse of those who have the commanding heights of the economy, the big international banks, et cetera, I mean, those guys are likely to transfer to Shenzhen and leave Hong Kong kind of high and dry. Now, if that is exactly the fear of what might happen in the future, all the more reason why experiments, which may seem rather modest and just beginning at present, such as this yellow circle economy, I mean, there is so much about this that is really promising. Among them being the idea that you're also organizing production under that label. It's not just simply that you're boycotting products from mainland China, whatever the wisdom of that might be, but that there are actual products that will carry this seal that have been created and designed in order to serve the needs of people who might be comfortable with the yellow circle economy. I think that's a very significant change, and to beginning to think about production for, you know, democratic values. Again, yesterday we had Dean Sanders on branding. You know, I mean, I think that some of the ideas that he and Mike Thompson had would kind of, you know, flow into that same circle, that you're not simply talking anymore about a consumer boycott. You're talking about ways to use the productive capacity to fulfill your social goals, which in this case is, you know, if we want to call it democracy, fine, but certainly it's about Hong Kong having a future that its own to steer.